Welcome to this explainer. Today we are jumping straight into the brilliant, perfectly synchronized 28-day command and response story of menstrual physiology. If you're prepping for your boards right now or getting ready for your obstetrics and gynecology rotations, let's explore this together, because mastering this neuroendocrine pathway is absolutely foundational to your practice. First things first, let's define the HPO axis. This acts as the overarching biochemical command center for the entire reproductive cycle. It's an interconnected, incredibly sensitive communication loop between the hypothalamus in the brain, the anterior pituitary gland right below it, and the ovaries down in the pelvis. Every single phase of the menstrual cycle is dictated by this axis. Here is our clinical roadmap for this explainer. First, the HPO axis command. Second, the ovarian cycle phases. Third, the uterine cycle phases. Fourth, synchronization and feedback. And finally, clinical application.
Section 1. The HPO axis command. From the brain down to the end organ.
Think of this as an elegantly simple three-step cascade. It shows us how a single releasing hormone triggers specific gonadotropins that eventually wake up the ovaries. It all kicks off when the hypothalamus secretes gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH. Now, this acts directly on the anterior pituitary, stimulating it to release two absolutely crucial hormones: follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and luteinizing hormone, or LH. These two messengers then travel all the way down to the ovaries, prompting them to produce our major steroid sex hormones, estradiol and progesterone.
Now, this hormone cheat sheet maps out exactly where these chemical messengers originate and what they're actually programmed to do. You can clearly trace the hierarchy here. GnRH from the hypothalamus commands the pituitary. The pituitary's FSH and LH command the ovaries. And finally, the ovaries release estradiol and progesterone, which command the tissues of the uterus.
Moving on to Section 2, the ovarian cycle phases. The factories of the pelvis.
During the follicular phase, which makes up the entire first half of the cycle, FSH, totally true to its name, stimulates the growth of these beautiful ovarian follicles. As the follicle matures and grows, it essentially becomes its own temporary endocrine gland, secreting increasing amounts of estrogen directly into the bloodstream.
Right, so the absolutely crucial point here is this sudden, massive spike in luteinizing hormone right in the middle of the cycle. It acts as the ultimate trigger. As that growing follicle pumps out more and more estrogen, it eventually hits a threshold that triggers a positive feedback loop, and the pituitary responds to this by dumping a massive surge of LH.
These rare surgical images capture the actual physical result of that LH surge. You are looking at the exact moment a mature follicle ruptures to release the ovum. But the ovary's job isn't done yet. That ruptured follicle immediately transforms into a new structure called the corpus luteum, or the yellow body. For the second half of the cycle, this corpus luteum takes over the factory floor, secreting massive amounts of progesterone.
Section 3. The uterine cycle phases. Building the house.
Meanwhile, the uterine environment is morphing through 4 distinct stages, painstakingly building a nutrient-rich environment and then tearing it all down if fertilization doesn't occur. We start with the menstrual phase on day 1, where low hormone levels cause the lining to shed. Then, driven by estrogen from that growing ovarian follicle we just talked about, we enter the proliferative phase, where the endometrium regenerates. After ovulation, the secretory phase begins, driven by progesterone, making the lining rich and receptive. Finally, if there's no pregnancy, the corpus luteum dies, hormone levels completely plummet, and we hit the ischemic phase. The blood vessels constrict, and that leads us right back to day 1.
To put it simply, and honestly this is a great way to remember it for your exams, estrogen builds the house while progesterone furnishes it. Estrogen stimulates the blood vessels to develop and thicken the lining, physically building up the walls. Progesterone then comes in and makes it a hospitable, nutrient-rich environment, maintaining it in preparation for a potential fertilized egg to implant.
Section 4. Synchronization and feedback. The 28-day timeline. This timeline really synthesizes everything we've covered, showing the absolute dual tracking of the ovarian and uterine cycles happening simultaneously over an average 28-day period. Notice how the follicular phase in the ovary aligns perfectly with the proliferative phase in the uterus. They both lead right up to day 14, ovulation. Then, the luteal phase in the ovary locks right into step with the secretory phase in the uterus for the remaining 14 days.
When you compare the two halves side by side, you can clearly see a major shift in both anatomical location and the dominant hormone at play once ovulation actually occurs. The first half is basically the estrogen show, focused on growth and proliferation. The second half is the progesterone show, focused entirely on secretion, maintenance, and waiting for an embryo.
Finally, Section 5. Clinical application. Tracking and manipulation.
In practice, patients can monitor physiological clues like cervical mucus and basal body temperature to estimate their peak fertility window. Under the influence of estrogen peaking right before ovulation, cervical mucus changes from tacky and crumbly to clear, thin, and highly stretchable, a property called spin barquette, which closely resembles raw egg whites. After ovulation, progesterone sweeps in and makes it thick and opaque again. Furthermore, charting the slight rise in the lowest resting body temperature, the BBT, can retrospectively confirm that ovulation has in fact occurred.
Let's do a quick knowledge check, shall we? Let's see if we can apply our understanding of the HPO axis feedback loops to a real-world scenario. Imagine it's day 1 of a patient's cycle, so her natural estrogen is at its absolute lowest. What happens if she starts taking a daily pill containing a low dose of synthetic estradiol? Think about the communication pathway traveling back up to the brain.
Because of the negative feedback loop, this exogenous hormone literally tricks the brain into halting its own production of stimulating hormones. It just shuts down the factories. The hypothalamus senses that steady dose of estrogen and thinks, we have enough, so it decreases GnRH. Without GnRH, the pituitary stops releasing FSH and LH. If there's no FSH, the ovarian follicles don't grow. If there's no follicle growth, there's no LH surge. And without an LH surge, ovulation simply does not happen.
And that brilliantly simple mechanism of negative feedback is exactly how oral contraceptives prevent pregnancy in millions of patients worldwide. By providing a steady, low dose of hormones, we keep the entire HPO axis in a state of quiet suppression. The uterus might still experience some lining growth from the synthetic hormones, but because the ovary never gets the signal to drop an egg, fertilization is totally impossible.
Of course, when this incredibly intricate balance of hormones and feedback loops is disrupted naturally, it leads to a variety of menstrual abnormalities that you'll be diagnosing in clinic. Anything from anovulation, where no egg is released, to amenorrhea, which is the complete absence of a period, all the way to excessive bleeding like menorrhagia. Understanding the baseline physiology of the HPO axis is literally the only way you can effectively troubleshoot these clinical presentations.
But I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought before your obstetrics module. How does a tiny fertilized egg manage to hack this entire neuroendocrine system to stop the ischemic phase from ever happening? Well, it secretes human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. This hormone actually mimics LH, keeping the corpus luteum alive and pumping out progesterone. That prevents the uterine lining from shedding, officially halting the menstrual cycle and beginning a pregnancy. Pretty incredible, right? Keep that mechanism in mind as you continue your clinical studies.